Labor has proposed an affordable housing authority to build the 100,000 affordable homes over 10 years that Labor has promised as part of our comprehensive plan to fix the housing crisis. And the Affordable Housing Authority will be part of central government, but it will be run like a commercial organisation with a board and a chief executive. It will have two jobs. The first is to manage the government's urban land holdings and make sure that over time there is enough land for residential development, business and commercial and industrial development, as well as infrastructure, electricity, roads and so on, and schools, hospitals and that sort of thing. So that's the first job. The second will be to lead large urban development projects like what we see at Hobsonville on the northwest fringe of Auckland, or the Tamaki redevelopment project in Glen Innes and Panmure. So we want to build a lot of affordable houses, but not just to spread them over the countryside in an unplanned way. We want to build whole communities with schools, top quality infrastructure, parks and open spaces, and good urban design. Well, that's a very good question. So if we allow development to happen outside this current city boundary, out in the country, in many cases there is no infrastructure there. So we don't want the taxpayer to be subsidising very expensive development way out in the countryside. So Labor is going to change the way that we finance infrastructure. At the moment, what happens is that the ratepayer or the taxpayer subsidise infrastructure like water, electricity or roads. The developer pays the cost of the infrastructure within a development, but simply passes those costs on to the person who buys a home in that development. What we want to do is change the rules so that new infrastructure for, say, a new urban development or new housing can be paid for through bonds. So we can bond financing is a very cheap way to borrow money, and then that can be paid back over the lifetime of the asset, that could be 30 to 50 years, through a targeted rate on the property in that development. Now that's much fairer and more efficient than the way we do it currently, because currently all those costs just end up on the price tag of a new home. If we pay it back through a targeted rate, it doesn't push up the price of the house or the home, but it's spread over 30 or 50 years. Much fairer, more cost effective and more efficient. Yes, because Labor believes that the casualty or the victim of this current housing crisis that the national government has allowed to get out of control are the first home buyers who simply can't afford to get into their own homes. And that crushes the Kiwi dream. And whether it's someone who's lived here for generations or whether it's a new migrant who's only arrived, we know that the thing people want the most is to own a home of their own. They want to have that independence, the security, the stability, and at the moment people are locked out. We're going to change that. The Kiwi built homes, the 100,000 affordable homes, will only be for first home buyers. So, you know, at the moment, land is the major cost in housing, and it's the big increase in land, urban land, that is the thing that is most responsible for driving up the cost of housing. But still, the cost of building is also too expensive. You know, we're paying about 30% more than people pay in Australia for the same building materials. I could walk into a Home Depot in California and buy treated Pinus radiata framing timber for 1/4 of the price you and I would pay if we go to a Bunnings or a Mitre 10. 1/4. Plasterboard or wallboard is very expensive in New Zealand compared to Australia, for example. So we have to do something about that, and the great opportunity that Kiwi Build gives us is that when we're paying for 10,000 new homes a year, we can cut deals with the building suppliers for the building materials and drive down the costs of those building supplies. The other way we can save money and pass the savings on to first home buyers is by tendering the work to construction companies who have the scale to do this work. Now, at the moment, most builders in New Zealand only build a handful of houses every year. They're very small companies. A couple of guys with a ute, a small truck, with a dog in the back and a cell phone, they build houses. But if we grow larger companies who can specialise, invest in technology, have better management, more innovation, they can build houses that are of better quality but at a more cost-effective price. And one of the ways they can do that is by building houses in factories and then shipping them onto the site and putting them up in days instead of building them from scratch over months. You know, one of the worst aspects of this housing crisis has been the families who have fallen through the cracks. As rent has gone up, the shortage of houses has become more acute. Last year in Auckland, the average rent went up $1,500. The year before that, it went up $2,000. And there are some families who simply haven't been able to find anywhere to live. And we've seen this terrible situation with families with young children living in their cars and living in campgrounds. And I don't think anybody in New Zealand feels good about that. And we believe that it's the responsibility of the government to make sure there's a decent roof over their heads. So Labor has said we would more than double the spending. We've made a promise that we would add $60 million over 4 years to the government's current commitment of $40 million over 4 years. That would more than double the amount of emergency housing provided. That money would pay community organisations, non-profit community organisations, to provide housing and social workers and support services to help the homeless families get their lives back on track and then find longer term accommodation. So the houses will not be built all in one place. They'll just be regular houses in the community that will be leased or purchased by the NGOs, by the community organisations for homeless families. It will be short-term accommodation, could be 3 weeks, anything up to 3 months, to help people get themselves sorted out and then to find a state house or a private rental for them that's a more stable long-term option for them. We believe that it's very important that we have to squeeze out the property speculation from the housing market. We've got into a crazy situation in New Zealand where people think the only way to get rich or to make money, to make a good life, is to buy and sell houses. But it's not productive activity. All it does is drive the price higher, and it means that our kids' generation will never be able to afford to own a home in our country's biggest city. Buying and selling houses doesn't create any jobs. We need jobs. It doesn't create exports. It doesn't generate wealth. It's unproductive activity. And we believe that it will never fix the housing crisis in New Zealand unless we stop this crazy property speculation. So there's a number of things we have to do. The first thing is that if we build lots of houses and we reform the planning rules to stop this artificial scarcity of land, because that's what attracts the land bankers and the speculators, we'll take away their profits. So that's probably the most important thing. But we also think it's important to tax the property speculators. So Labor will change the law and tax speculators who sell a rental property within 5 years of buying it. So under Labor's policy, if you sell a rental property within 5 years, you will pay full income tax on that. So maybe up to 33% of the capital gain that you make. So that's the first thing. The second is that we've signalled clearly, Andrew Little, the Labor leader, has signalled that we are looking at negative gearing. Negative gearing is the practice which allows an investor in rental property to offset any loss that they make on a rental property against other taxable activity. So if you borrow lots of money to buy a house, and the interest payments on your mortgage to the bank are more than the money you make from the rent, then you're making a loss. Currently, people can set that loss off against the tax they pay on other work that they do or other businesses they have. That's a public subsidy, a taxpayer subsidy for property speculation. And it is one of the things that's responsible for this out of control speculative mania that's going on. So we're going to look at that and look at ways that we can shut it down. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to stop non-resident foreign speculators, people who are not citizens and don't live in this country. We're going to stop them from buying and selling houses here. And we think that's not the biggest cause of the problem, but we still think it's significant and it will make a difference. And Labor's policy is the same as the Australian federal government, and that is to say if you are an offshore speculator, if you want to buy property here, build a new home. We welcome you to invest in building a new home because that adds to the supply of houses that we need. And we look at Australia, we look at Singapore, we look at Hong Kong, we look at Malaysia. They've all got policies that very tightly control foreign investment in their housing because they are looking to protect the local people. Labor will tax speculators because we don't want to see people making a killing at the expense of generation rent. So Labor will tax speculators. We've made that very, very clear. We'll never fix this problem unless we squeeze the speculation out of the housing market. We want to stabilise housing prices. You know, Germany is one of the most successful economies in the world. It's had stable house prices for 30 years. In Germany, when people want to make money, they don't invest in housing. They invest in businesses that create jobs and exports and prosperity. That's what we want to do. The other thing is that National won't build houses. I don't really understand why. It's the obvious thing to do. When you have a housing shortage, you build more houses. National won't do it. They have these special housing areas in Auckland that have been going for 3 years. And in those special housing areas, they speed up the consenting. Only 1,000 houses have been built in 3 years. It's a complete failure. Labor is going to build 100,000 affordable houses. We've done it before in this country, and we can do it again. We're a political party. We want to be in government next year, and we want to fix the housing crisis. We know that the housing issue is the #1 political issue at the moment in New Zealand. Everybody's talking about it. It's a social and economic crisis, and people want solutions. And that's why we've released our comprehensive housing plan with all of these policies. We're going to tax the speculators. We're going to free up the planning rules. We're going to build 100,000 affordable homes for New Zealanders. We're going to provide emergency housing for the most vulnerable people who have fallen between the cracks. And we're going to make sure that all rental properties are warm and dry. This is our agenda for change. And I think there are many New Zealanders who support us. You know, more than half of New Zealanders are living in rental housing now. More than half. Most of them, if they had the opportunity, would love to be able to buy their own home. But they can't under the national government's policies. Even people who own their own homes, they look at their children and their grandchildren and they feel terribly sad that their children will never have the opportunity to own a home in Auckland unless something changes. And there are so many New Zealanders who can't bear to see kids living in campgrounds and sleeping every night in the cars of their parents. We have to change this, and Labor has the plan to do just that. It's for both. We want to benefit the people of New Zealand. That's the point. Labor is the party of middle New Zealanders. We are meeting the needs of most people. We're not looking after the wealthy few at the top. John Key's attitude is that people are getting rich, they're making a lot of money. Some people are making a lot of money by buying and selling houses. John Key likes that. He doesn't want to stop that. What Labor says is that this situation is bad for the whole country. It's bad for our children. It's bad for most people. It's driving a big inequality gap between the rich and the poor. It's driving a gap between baby boomers and millennials. It's driving a gap between people who own their homes and people who rent. It's even driving a gap between Auckland and the rest of New Zealand. It's not good for our country, so we have to do something about this. And we know that we've got the policies to really make this change.